We're starting a new book today. Actually, it's not new at all. It's about 2,400 years old. It is Plato's Republic, probably the most important work in all of philosophy, or at least the most influential book in all of philosophy. I am reading this book for a pretty simple reason, actually. So I've read a number of books here on the channel, gotten a few comments here or there, and I'd like to participate in a bigger community of people who are reading and enjoying books. And PewDiePie has started a book club, and his first choice, or I guess his next choice, is the Republic of Plato, which is pretty ambitious, but I kind of like that. So I invite any PewDiePie fans, any 9-year-olds who want to read Plato's Republic with somebody, don't want to feel all alone while you're turning the page and trying to figure out what Thrasymachus and Glaucon are talking about. Come to the channel, hit the old subscribe button. I'm going to try to do one video per book. These are going to be pretty long videos because I think each book is going to take at least 2 hours to get through. And the way I do this is I just read out loud, and I kind of tell you what I'm thinking as I'm going along. And hopefully that makes things a little bit more interesting for you. And if you want to tell me what you're thinking as we're reading this, leave a little comment below. I will definitely read it because I don't get a whole lot of comments. So yeah, that's about it. I've talked a little bit about the Republic before in the Brave New World series that we did. So there are certain similarities between Plato's ideal society and Aldous Huxley's nightmare society. Some food for thought there. I do want to recommend a book before we start that I read last year. One of the best books I read last year was called Philosophy Between the Lines. I believe the author's name is Michael Metzler. And the idea here is that certain authors have ideas that are so dangerous that they can't actually tell you what their idea is. They have to kind of dance around it and write esoterically. And so Metzler's thesis is that Plato was one of these authors that had such crazy ideas, he couldn't put them in his own mouth. He either had to put them into Socrates' mouth, or maybe it wasn't even into Socrates' mouth. He had to put them into, like, Thrasymachus' mouth. This idea is often associated with Leo Strauss, who's a fairly controversial philosophical figure of the 20th century. And I haven't read a whole lot of Strauss. I'd like to read a little bit more, but I am very interested in the basic idea. And it certainly seems to be true on a place like YouTube, where people get demonetized, thrown off for saying things that they're not allowed to. And so if you're not allowed to speak what's on your mind, maybe you say something similar to what you're thinking, or you make a straw man. I don't know. Lots of different techniques for that. In any event, the Republic is fairly famous for these different interpretations. I haven't read the Republic in a long, long time. I think I only read a few chapters of it when I was in high school. So I'm looking forward to getting back to it. I kind of know about the ideas because they're just in the intellectual culture generally. But I think it's going to be great to get back to the source here. So I'm looking forward to reading this, revisiting the great mind of Plato, and I'm excited for anybody who wants to join me for it. So, without further ado, I am going to present to you Book 1 of Plato's Republic. I'm going to be reading this C.D.C. Reeve translation. It's in copyright still. I hope I don't get a copy strike. I'm going to be really depressed if I get a copy strike for reading Plato's Republic on YouTube. Like, you know, I'm not trying to steal a Justin Bieber song here. So, I don't know. If I get taken down, I'll be switching to a public domain translation later. So, enjoy it while you can. Why did I choose the Reeve version? I did a little bit of research on these different translations. This is one of the newest ones and has received a lot of praise. One of the big changes from the original is the way the Republic is told. It's Socrates is saying, well, I went down to the pier and I talked to this guy, and then that guy said this and this guy said that. The way this is rendered, it kind of takes you out of that frame, so it's more direct. It just says, Glaucon said this, Cephalus said that, and so you don't have to, like, it's not just Socrates said this, Socrates said this guy said that, Socrates said this guy said that. So I like to think of this as like the Lifetime movie reenactment. So it's supposed to be a little more exciting in that sense, but it's also supposed to stick to the original text very closely, which I also like. So that's kind of the extent of my thinking that went into this. It's the newest one, got good reviews, good enough for me. Hope he doesn't sue me or take me down here. So here we go. Plato's Republic. Pull up a chair, get comfortable in a reading chair, get some water, and let's go. Let's see. Book 1. Okay, so the way this is going to work is I have the Kindle edition of this C.D.C. Reeve translation. You'll see a lot of numbers and braces here. I think these are the page numbers in the printed edition. So those will come up a lot. And then all these other things, like 327A, I'm actually not sure. So some of these are notes. Others are references to, it's like the Stevenson text. So when scholars are trying to cross-reference different passages, it's like the Bible. You know, the Bible it's divided into books. Books are divided into chapters. Each chapter has a verse. In the original Bible, there weren't verses. It was just some guy, decided to break up each thing into verses, and then the verses kind of became canonical. So it's sort of in a similar way, some guy just came along and broke up the Republic into little bits so that they could cross-reference each other. So I think that's what all these weird 5s and B's and letters and numbers are about. And then also we have actual footnotes, which are hyperlinked here. So that's as far as I know, that's kind of the business going on with that. But that's not very interesting. So let's begin. Book 1. Socrates' narration begins. Okay, so I think this is the part where he's just kind of changed the narrative structure to make this more engaging. So here's Socrates talking. I went down to the Piraeus yesterday. I think that's like the port in Athens, if you've ever been to Athens. It's like 10 miles from the city center. With Glaucon, the son of Ariston, to say a prayer to the goddess. And also because I wanted to see how they would manage the festival, since they were holding it for the first time. Is this... I don't know which festival this is, but I do like that this is like this great work of philosophy. And he's just like, oh yeah, me and my buddy just went down to check out the festival yesterday. Makes it more relatable, you know. I thought the procession of the local residents was beautiful, but the show put on by the Thracians was no less so, in my view. Okay, so we got sort of like, you ever go to a parade and they're like, here's the, I don't know, firefighters of Tuscaloosa, and here's the police officers of Sheboygan. I think that's the same idea what's going on. Like they both had great floats, the locals and the Thracians. After we had said our prayer and watched the procession, we started back toward town. Then Polemarchus, the son of Cephalus, saw us from a distance as we were hurrying homeward, and told his slave boy to run and ask us to wait for him. The boy caught hold of my cloak from behind. Okay, so Socrates and Glaucon are going to check out the festival. Polemarchus sees them, and he sends his boy to say, hold up. Hold up. Slave. Polemarchus wants you to wait. I turned around, this is Socrates talking, and asked where he was. Slave. He's coming up behind you. Please wait for him. Glaucon. All right, we will. Shortly after that, Polemarchus caught up with us. Adeimantus, Glaucon's brother, was with him, and so were Niceratus, the son of Nicias, and some others, all of whom were apparently on their way from the procession. I kind of wonder what this is about. You know, like he didn't need to put the festival in here. He didn't need to put the procession in here. I do think it's interesting that like it's people catching up to Socrates. So this, at least sort of psychologically, this puts Socrates at kind of at the forefront. And other people are like, whoa, it's like, slow down, Socrates. We're trying to figure out what you're saying. You know, sort of the, whatever, the physical situation mirroring the intellectual situation is what I'm guessing. Alright, so everybody's coming back in the procession. Everybody's in a good mood. It's like the concert's over. Everybody's happy. Polemarchus. It looks to me, Socrates, as if you two are hurrying to get away to town. Socrates. That isn't a bad guess. Polemarchus. But do you see how many we are? Socrates. Certainly. Well then, either you must prove yourself stronger than all these people, or you'll have to stay here. Uh-oh. Little showdown at the Piraeus. Socrates says, isn't there another alternative still? That we persuade you that you should let us go? Okay, so I think I see where this is going. There's a little... It's like kind of... Does might make right? Polemarchus. But could you persuade us if we won't listen? They always listen in these stories. No, it's like the guy who's captured in a movie or something, and he's like chained up, and he's like he's talking to the guard. The guard's like, "I'm not going to listen to anything you say," and he's like, "Well, you know what your boss was just saying about you." Similar idea, I think. I don't really know. Glaucon. There's no way we could. Polemarchus. Well, we won't listen. You'd better make up your mind to that. Yeah. Persuasion. It's gonna happen. I also like kind of Glaucon's rhetorical pose here. He's like, we couldn't persuade you anyway. So that's, in some ways, that's like the most dangerous persuasive technique. When somebody's like, oh yeah, you can't persuade me of anything. You're like, yeah, no, I couldn't, man. You're just so smart. No way I could persuade you of anything at all. But, you know, that guy was talking about you over there. Adeimantus. You mean to say you don't know that there's to be a torch race on horseback for the goddess tonight? Why didn't you say so? Socrates. On horseback? That's something new. Are they going to race on horseback and hand the torches on in relays, or what? I do like this translation. Feels modern. Polemarchus. And relays. Besides, there'll be an all-night celebration that will be worth seeing. We'll get up after dinner and go see the festivities. We will meet lots of young men there and have a discussion. So stay and do as we ask. Is he really asking? I don't know. Glaucon, it looks as if we will have to stay. Yeah. Look how many of them there are. And I also love this idea. It's like, yeah, you see how many of us are here? You're going to have to stay and have a philosophical discussion with us. We're not taking no for an answer. Socrates. If you think so, we must. So this is kind of Socrates narrating again. We went to Polemarchus' house, and there we found Lysias and Euthydemus, the brothers of Polemarchus. And what's more, Thrasymachus of Chalcedon was there too, and Charmantides of Paeania, and Cleitophon, the son of Aristonomus. Sorry for butchering these pronunciations. If anybody who knows Greek more than I do wants to leave a little comment, I will do my best to get these right in future installments. Polemarchus' father, Cephalus, was also inside. Okay, so we got a bunch of people. I don't know if we need to keep all these people straight. We'll see. Alright, so Polemarchus' father, Cephalus, was also inside. And I thought he looked quite old. You see, I hadn't seen him for some time. He was sitting on a sort of chair with cushions and had a wreath on his head, as he had been offering a sacrifice in the courtyard. You don't see that too often. Like, go over to somebody's house and like, oh yeah, it's like, what's that wreath on your head? Like, I was just offering a sacrifice in the courtyard. Anyway, what's new with you? We sat down beside him, since some chairs were arranged in a circle there. As soon as he saw me, Cephalus greeted me. Okay, I'm going to pause very briefly here, because Cephalus, I did a little bit of background reading here on the Republic, and Cephalus is a character that some philosophers ascribe a lot of importance to. So he only shows up like in this first book, I think. But Leo Strauss in particular thought that Cephalus was a very significant character, so I'm going to be paying very close attention to this, just because I've been kind of tipped off that maybe he's more important than he looks. I mean, maybe not, but I will be looking closely at the Cephalus character for that reason. All right, so Cephalus is talking, and he is the father of Polemarchus. Socrates, you don't often come down to the Piraeus to see us. Yet you should. If it were still easy for me to make the trip to town, you wouldn't have to come here. On the contrary, we would come to you. But, as it is, you ought to come here more often. I want you to know, you see, that, in my case at least, as the other pleasures, the bodily ones, wither away, my appetites for discussions and their pleasures grow stronger. So please do as I ask. Have your conversation with these young men and stay here with us, as you would with your close friends and relatives. This is a reasonable request. It's like, look, I'm not here for the pleasure of the flesh anymore. I'm just looking for some good convo. Come on down to Piraeus, man. Socrates says, I certainly will, Cephalus. In fact, I enjoy engaging in discussion with the very old. I think we should learn more from them, since they're like people who have traveled a road that we too will probably have to follow. What the road is like, whether rough and difficult, or smooth and easy. And I would be particularly glad to find out from you what you think about it, since you've reached the point in life the poets call old age's threshold. Is it a difficult time of life? What have you to report about it? So this is kind of interesting, because Socrates is definitely not wrong here. Like, old people are always trying to tell young people things, and it's not just because they're bored. It's like, they're like, no, I actually have lived a full life. I know how all of this works. Like, I'm trying to let you know now. Things are going to change. Enjoy it while you're young. Or get it while you're young, depending on the situation. Alright, so Socrates enjoys talking with the very old. Cephalus says, by Zeus, Socrates, I'll tell you exactly what I think. You see, a number of us who are more or less the same age often get together so as to preserve the old saying. The old saying. What is that? Am I going to regret hitting the footnote? I might. God ever draws together like to like. Got to preserve that saying. When they meet... okay, so this is... okay, yeah, this is... I think this is their Romeo Club. You know Romeo Clubs? Retired old men eating out? They were doing this even in the 4th century BC. The majority of our members lament, longing for the lost pleasures of their youth, and reminiscing about sex, drinking parties, feasts, and the other things that go along with them. He's really pretty open here. Like, most people, they'd be like, oh yeah, drinking parties, feasts, and the other things. Sex. And he's just like, yeah, sex and all that other great stuff. They get irritated, as if they had been deprived of very great things, and had lived well then, but are not living now. I've met some old people like that. Some others, too, even moan about the abuse heaped on old people by their relatives, and for that reason, recite a litany of all the evils old age has caused them. But I don't think they blame the real cause, Socrates. After all, if that were the cause, I too would have had the same experiences, at least as far as old age is concerned, and so would everyone else of my age. But, as it is, I've met others in the past who don't feel that way. In particular, the poet Sophocles. I was once present when he was asked by someone, How are you as far as sex goes, Sophocles? Can you still make love to a woman? Quiet, man, he replied. I'm very glad to have escaped from all that, like a slave who has escaped from a deranged and savage master. I thought at the time what he said was sensible, and I still do. You see, old age brings peace and freedom from all such things. When the appetite ceases to stress and importune us, everything Sophocles said comes to pass, and we escape from many insane masters. It's like this crazy boss called your libido. But in these matters, and in those concerning one's relatives, the real cause isn't old age, Socrates, but the way people live. If they are orderly and contented, old age too is only moderately onerous. If they aren't, both old age, Socrates, and youth are hard to bear. Okay, I want to go back over this. This is a pretty interesting passage. The first thing I like about this is that old age is something everyone can relate to in some sense. And Socrates points out, like, this is a road we're all going to have to travel sometime. So, in some sense, it's like every reader will be interested in these questions. Kind of young people are afraid of getting old. Old people don't know what to think about being old. You know, and this is when he's relating the story of Socrates. Someone asks him, like, can you still make love to a woman? You know, for a lot of people, that's their, like, big fear. It's, I don't know, sort of this like, Freudian, I don't know, what is it, castration anxiety in some sense, or anxiety about growing impotent. So I think Socrates very quickly speaks to some fundamental fears in human psychology, having to do with sex and just generally having to do with your own mortality. So and I think generally you can't really have a serious... I don't think any philosophy can be taken seriously if it doesn't deal with the concept and the subject of death. That just seems to be sort of the biggest possible issue there is facing an individual human. And the Republic just goes immediately after that, which I like. And so we'll see what he has to say about it more, but I think this opening is great. In terms of just finding universals to talk about, universal fears, universal concerns, and maybe seeing if there's some sort of universal wisdom. The last part I wanted to briefly touch on here is, so he's saying that the cause of all their troubles isn't just being old, it's the way you live. I think that's probably true in a lot of cases, like, especially you see when people get into about their 60s. Like, some people in their 60s who just didn't take care of themselves start to look really old immediately, and then other people who are still running half marathons like still look like they're 45. And it all comes down to, you know, the decisions you made in the past and how you lived in the past. So I tend to agree with it's not. I mean, eventually it's old age is going to get you when you're 100. So it depends kind of how old you're talking about, but yeah, by those mid-60s, as things start catching up to you, what I hear. Okay, so Socrates, this is the Socrates narrative frame again. He says, I admired him for saying that, and I wanted him to tell me more, so I urged him on. So I guess this is Socrates talking. I imagine when you say that, Cephalus, the masses do not accept it. On the contrary, they think you bear old age more easily, not because of the way you live, but because you are wealthy. Sorry about that. For the wealthy, they say, have many consolations. Okay, so he's saying, yeah, it's not because you took care of yourself, it's because you're rich. How about that? Oh no, this is what the masses think. So Socrates isn't telling us what he thinks yet. He was also very guarded, kind of in the opening. He's like, well, that's not a bad guess. He's not saying anything's true or false. He's just kind of like, oh yeah, maybe you might think that. Interesting idea. Huh? These people think that. Cephalus says, that's true. They're not convinced, and there's something in their objection, though not as much as they think. Themistocles' retort is relevant here. When someone from Seriphus insulted him by saying his high reputation was due to his city, not to himself. So Themistocles, I guess, is from Athens. He replied that, had he been a Seriphian, he would not be famous, but nor would the other, had he been an Athenian. Ayo! Did you get that? Someone's like, hey, and this is like saying, like, oh, you're only famous because you went to Harvard. He's like, well, yeah, you know, if I went to some place like, you know, Williams College, I would not be famous. But if you went to Harvard, you wouldn't be famous. So how about that? The same account applies to those who are not rich and find old age hard to bear. A good person who would not easily bear old age if it were coupled with poverty. But one who wasn't good would not be at peace with himself, even if he were wealthy. So it's kind of like saying you need two things. Like, you need to be from the famous city, and you need to be really good at what you do to be famous. Like, either one. If you don't have either of those, then you're going to live in obscurity, I guess. So it's saying you need to be good, and you need to be wealthy. So just being wealthy isn't enough. Socrates says, "Did you inherit most of your wealth, Cephalus, or did you make it yourself?" Isn't this the real question of anybody giving advice? You know, you got all these lifestyle bloggers, like, oh, just travel the world and live how you want to. It's like, well, let me ask you something. Did you inherit your wealth, or did you make it yourself? Life's so easy. Cephalus says, "What did I make for myself, Socrates, you ask? As a moneymaker, I'm in between my grandfather and my father. See, my grandfather and namesake inherited about the same amount of wealth as I possess and multiplied it many times. However, my father Lysanias diminished that amount to even less than I have now. As for me, I'm satisfied to leave my sons here no less, but a little more than I inherited." So inherited wealth showing up kind of early in this. That's interesting to me, because if you think about the causes of sort of like societal wide injustice, inherited wealth is kind of like, in terms of like creating and sustaining inequality, kind of high up the list, but also something you're not really allowed to talk about or mention. Because it's just so sacrosanct. When you think like, oh, yeah, these people aren't getting a fair start in life. It's like, yeah, because this person inherited $100 million and this person has nothing. And you think about the total amount of wealth transferred, like, you could completely reshape society, over a generation just by changing like inheritance laws and just saying like, okay, nobody gets an inheritance anymore, and we're going to use all this money to like build better schools or whatever. Then I don't know. It's an interesting question if people would like still work as hard, because that's been the traditional argument about inherited wealth. Is like Milton Friedman talks about this. He's like, well, okay, look, if you had a 100% inheritance tax, nobody's going to do any work, or they're just going to spend all their money on high living, and they're not going to keep the money in the company. But then you look at someone like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, like, it's like, oh, they're giving their kids like nothing. Warren Buffett gave his kid like $30,000 in 1970. Bill Gates has given his kids like $10 million each. And it's not like they're just spending the rest on super yachts. They're just like giving it away to charity. So it kind of diminishes the argument that like you need the incentive of inheritance to like keep people working, because at least sort of the richest people in society seem to be doing it for other reasons than high living. In any event, I'm curious if this inheritance stuff will come back later. The reason I asked is that you do not seem particularly to love money. One other thing is Schopenhauer. He said the key to happiness is twofold. You got to be intelligent, and you need to be born wealthy. It's like, I don't think he's necessarily wrong there, but it's just like something people don't really want to hear. Okay, and those who have not made it themselves are usually like that. Some wisdom there. But those who have made it themselves love it twice as much as anyone else. For just as poets love their poems and fathers their children, so those who have made money take their money seriously, both as something they've made themselves and, just as other people do, because it's useful. Okay, so they take it more personally. Like, they see that number, they make $1 million or something, like, I earned that. That's my $1 million. That's the fruit of my labor. Do not touch my money. Whereas if somebody just like won the lottery, they're like, oh yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's money. It's useful for stuff, I guess. And probably that has to do with. So he's making the comparison to poets and loving their poems and fathers their children. It's something these people are spending a lot of time thinking about. So, if you're a poet, you're like, this is going to be a great poem. Like, I'm just thinking about how great this poem is for all this time. If you're a parent, you're like, man, my kid's going to grow up to be a great kid. You're just spending all the time thinking about how great the kid's going to be. If you're making money, work is work. So you're not necessarily thinking about work. You're just thinking about that money. Like, man, I'm going to be so rich. I'm going to have all that money. So you spend hours and hours and hours and hours just thinking about the money. So that's why you're attached to it. It's just because you spent so long thinking about it. Okay, instead of thinking about poetry or great philosophy. Okay. This makes them difficult to be with, since they are unwilling to praise anything except money. Yeah. Oh, man. I've known people sort of like this. Although the people I've known, it's not like they praise money, it's more like they complain about taxes. Not going to name any names here, but I've known these people. Cephalus, that's true. Indeed it is. But tell me something else. What do you think is the greatest good you've enjoyed as a result of being very wealthy? Getting right to it. This is another, psychologically this is great, because everybody's kind of curious about the extremely wealthy. It's been true since the invention of wealth. People are like, what's the best part of that? This is like Instagram. It's like, oh man, you get to go to these great places, you get to own this really expensive stuff. Tell me how awesome it is, man. Empathy for the rich keeps the world turning. Cephalus says, what I have to say probably would not persuade the masses. But you are well aware, Socrates, that when someone thinks his end is near, he becomes frightened and concerned about the things he did not fear before. It is then that the story is told about Hades. Here's death again. That a person who has been unjust here must pay the penalty there. Stories he used to make fun of. Twist his soul this way and that. For fear they are true. So I guess he, being the person nearing death, used to make fun of these stories. Like, yeah, I'm not afraid of the Undertaker. Spare me. And whether because of the weakness of his old age, or because he's now closer to what happens in Hades, and has a clearer view of it, or whatever it is, he's filled with foreboding and fear, begins to calculate and consider whether he's been unjust to anyone. If he finds many injustices in his life, he often even awakes from sleep in terror, as children do, and lives in anticipation of evils to come. Yeah, gonna be called to account soon, buddy. But someone who knows he has not been unjust has sweet good hope as his constant companion, a nurse to his old age, as Pindar says. I don't know Pindar. For he puts it charmingly, Socrates, when he says that when someone lives a just and pious life, sweet hope is in his heart, nurse and companion to his age. Hope, captain of the ever-twisting mind of mortal men. Yeah. How amazingly well he puts that. It is in this connection, I would say, that the possession of wealth is the most valuable, not for every man, but for a good and orderly one. Not cheating someone even unintentionally, not lying to him, not owing a sacrifice to some god or money to a person, and as a result departing for that other place in fear. The possession of wealth makes no small contribution to this. It has many other uses too, but putting one thing against the other, Socrates, I'd say that for a man with any sense, that is how wealth is most useful. Okay, so I'm guessing he's saying it's great to be wealthy because you don't need to cheat other people. Some wealthy people do cheat other people, but I think he's saying, yeah, it's like if you, especially if you inherited a lot of money, you're just like, you're not really trying to screw people over necessarily. Is that true? I don't actually know that that's true. I think in some sense, wealth it's relative in the sense that people are always looking for more, and so I think people, even extremely rich people, will screw other people over. We'll see what Socrates says about it. A fine sentiment, Cephalus. But speaking of that thing itself, justice, Now I'm going to hit the footnote on this, because that might be a special word. See glossary of terms, SV justice. I'm not going to do that. Never mind. Are we to say it is simply speaking the truth and paying whatever debts one has incurred? Or is it sometimes just to do these things, sometimes unjust? I mean this sort of thing, for example. Everyone would surely agree that if a man borrows weapons from a sane friend, and if he goes mad and asks for them back, the friend should not return them. It would not be just. It would not be just if he did. Nor should anyone be willing to tell the whole truth to someone in such a state. Okay, getting to moral questions. So we've talked about death. We've talked about having a lot of money. Talking about fear of being tortured in Hades. And now we're getting to, like, ethics somehow. And I'm just trying to figure out the segue here. He just says, oh, speaking of that thing, justice. So Cephalus is kind of worried. He's worried on his own account. Like, oh man, I'm going to go to Hades. I'm going to get tortured. And this is sort of predicated on, so we have this idea of justice. So Socrates said, well, what is just? But that's motivated by, like, fear of some kind of, like, personal retribution on the Judgment Day, or whatever the Greek version of the Judgment Day is. So he's saying, okay, here's something. Speaking the truth, is that just? And he gives an example of where speaking the truth might not be just, or paying a debt might not be just, might not lead to a good outcome. Because you're like, oh yeah, I borrowed your gun, and then you went insane, and you want your gun back. Do I need to repay my debt, or are you just going to go on a killing spree? Yeah. Anyway, good points. Cephalus says, that's true. Socrates, then the following is not the definition of justice: to speak the truth and repay what one has borrowed. Okay, so it feels like a very sudden segue here to getting to definitions of justice. But this is kind of, now they're in debate mode. So Socrates kind of started out like, oh yeah, what's it like being really rich? What's it like being very old? Now he's just like, well, I just want to talk. Speaking of justice, I got some things to say about justice. A lot of people think it's this. It's not. I can give you a counterexample. Okay, Polemarchus interrupted. Well, that certainly is, Socrates. We are to trust Simonides at all. Cephalus. Well then, I'll hand over the discussion to you, since it's time for me to look after the sacrifices. Yeah, put my wreath back on. He's like, I don't want to talk about justice. Okay, so very interesting. So is that the end of Cephalus? Polemarchus. Yeah, so I guess I know Cephalus is still here. All right, he ain't gone yet. Polemarchus, am I, Polemarchus, not heir of all your possessions? Oh yeah, because this is the son of Cephalus. Cephalus replied with a laugh, certainly. And off he went to the sacrifice. Okay, I'm only pausing here because I'm told that Cephalus may be more important than he looks. Maybe he'll be back, but I don't think so. He's almost like this Voltaire sort of figure, in that he's saying, it's like he can talk, like he knows how to talk about old age. He knows about wealth, and he's like, yeah, my grandfather made a lot of money. My dad lost most of it. I've been trying to, invest in the S&P 500 and get some of it back. Hopefully I can leave my kids more than I had. I think I just want to avoid these night terrors of, like, people that I owe money to that I may have screwed over in life. So wealth is nice because, like, I have a peaceful mind, and I can go to bed every night and wake up every morning and not worry what's going to happen to me in the afterlife. And then Socrates wants to start talking justice, and Cephalus is just like, I I gotta go see a man about a dog here. So, if I were to assign some special significance to Cephalus here, it would be that he kind of thinks discussions of justice aren't maybe relevant to him. It's like if you have money, then you're not really concerned about justice. You're just like, you guys talk about this. Like, I sleep good at night. I ain't too worried. Like, my father and grandfather made some money for me. And I mentioned Voltaire because, like, at the end of Candide, he's looking for sort of the best society, the best of all possible worlds, and then at the end they just kind of say, well, maybe it's just best to look after your own garden. And so Cephalus looks like the guy who's looking after his own garden, just kind of keeping his head down. Let's not rock the boat here. Maybe these larger questions are impossible. These larger definitions, and it's like Socrates tries to trap him with his definition, and Cephalus just says, "I don't really care, man. I got a family. I got other things to do. You guys talk amongst yourselves. I'm not interested in these abstract questions. I'm more interested in these immediate experiences of like what it's like to have money, what it's like to grow old, and that they're not generalizations." He says, because he's saying, look, people say all this stuff is due to old age, but I'm not going to generalize about that. I think it depends on the circumstances. It depends how you lived in your youth and how you live as an old person. That determines like your state of happiness. There's not necessarily one thing that explains everything. It's just everything kind of circumstantial. So if I were to ascribe special meaning to Cephalus, it would be that. And I think that is maybe he's the smartest character in the book. I don't know. So I'm really enjoying this kind of ambiguity here, and this character just talking a little bit and then disappearing. And I don't think we're going to see Cephalus again. But I'm not actually sure. So we'll continue on here. But I think that idea is very fascinating. That if Cephalus is the smartest person in the book, what does it mean that he leaves like immediately? Does it mean that sort of the rest of these discussions are ultimately fruitless? And it might mean that. So I don't know. I'm really enjoying reading this and thinking about these questions. Okay, so Cephalus goes off to the sacrifice. Socrates, then tell us, heir to the discussion. I think that's a joke. Just what Simonides said about justice that you think is correct. Polemarchus. He said it is just to give to each what is owed to him. And a fine saying it is, in my view. Give to each person what is owed. Socrates. Well, now, it's not easy to disagree with Simonides, since he is a wise and godlike man. What exactly does he mean? Perhaps you know, Polemarchus, but I do not understand. Clearly he does not mean what we said a moment ago, namely, giving back to someone whatever he has lent to you, even if he is out of his mind when he asks for it. And yet, what he has lent to you is surely something that is owed to him, isn't it? So this is like, you borrow somebody's gun and then he goes nuts. Polemarchus. Yes. But when he's out of his mind, it is, under no circumstances, to be given to him. True. Then it seems Simonides must have meant something else when he said that to return what is owed is just. Da-da-da, caught you in a trap. I do think this out-of-the-mind idea is fascinating to me, because I think that's one of the big problems with treating identity as like this fixed construct over time, is some people go crazy, and it makes pretty much every other social or political construct not work anymore. Like if someone is out of their mind, are they supposed to vote? Like, or do we treat them as being rational? Do we let them keep the office that they were elected to? Do we let them keep the job that they had? Are their legal contracts still binding? Or even something like the afterlife. It's like, say, you lose your mind at age 30. So you're like one person in the first half of your life, and then you're another person the other half of your life. Well, which version goes to Hades? You know, is it the person who's out of their mind going to Hades, or is it the person from before, like the normal person? Is that the version going to Hades? So I think ideas like this present a lot of philosophical problems. Yeah, for if you just, especially for ideas of like relating the soul to a personality, and then you have this sort of personality that might change from like a drastic head injury or just going insane. But something people don't really like to think and talk about, because we all like to think that everything's hunky-dory, everybody is who they say they are, everybody is who they used to be. Okay. And it's the same thing with criminal things. It's like innocent by reason of insanity. Okay. Or, you know, if you lock somebody up, like, for a crime, and then they go crazy in prison, and they don't remember anything, it's like, well, why are we locking this person? This person isn't necessarily connected to that old thing. We're not, like, teaching this crazy person anything by keeping them in solitary confinement or whatever. Are we just doing this to make ourselves feel better, and not because there's any kind of objective purpose to it? Okay. So Polemarchus replies, something else indeed, by Zeus. He meant friends owe something good to their friends, never something bad. Socrates says, I understand. You mean someone does not give a lender what he is owed by giving him gold, when the giving and taking would be harmful, and both he and the lender are friends? Okay, so this is, I'm going to go back over that again. Someone does not give a lender what he is owed by giving him gold, when the giving and taking would both be harmful, and both he and the lender are friends. Okay, so it's like you borrow something, you borrow gold from somebody. I guess it's gold in this case, but you're from a friend, but then it'd be like harmful to return it because you're like, I really need that. Okay, I think that's what's going on here. Polemarchus. It certainly is. Okay, isn't that what you say Simonides meant? Now, what about this, says Socrates? Should one also give to one's enemies whatever is owed to them? Should you give to your enemies what's owed to them? Yeah, do we make a distinction between friends and enemy in terms of debt repayment? Polemarchus. Yes, by all means. What is in fact owed to them. And what an enemy owes an enemy, in my view, is also precisely what is appropriate. Something bad. Yeah, like, you're my enemy, so the only thing I owe you is an insult. It seems then, Simonides was speaking in riddles, just like a poet, when he said what justice is. I get the feeling Socrates is going to be speaking in riddles. For what he meant, it seems, is that it is just to give to each what is appropriate to him, and this is what he called giving him what he is owed. Okay, so Polemarchus is saying, yeah, you should give him what he's owed. A punch in the face. Oh! And Socrates is like, well, he's not actually owed a punch in the face. That's appropriate for him. But Simonides is just playing this little language game, saying owed is appropriate. Okay. Polemarchus. What else do you think he meant? Socrates. Then what in the name of Zeus do you think he would answer if someone asked him this? Simonides, what owed or appropriate things does the craft we call medicine give? I'm going to guess that's like techne. I don't know a lot of Greek. And to which things? Okay, what owed or appropriate things does the craft we call medicine give? And to which things? So, medicine owes something, I guess. I don't know how a craft owes something. Owes or appropriate. Well, we'll see where this discussion goes. Polemarchus. Clearly, he would say it gives drugs, food, and drink to bodies. Socrates. And what owed or appropriate things did the craft we call cooking give, and to which things? So this is kind of interesting because he's moved this owing and appropriate things from kind of human actors, subjects, to these more abstract arts. I don't really know how that works because like cooking is just an abstraction. I don't know how it gives owed or appropriate things. Okay, well we'll follow the line of thought here. It gives pleasant flavors to food, says Polemarchus. Now good. Now, what does a craft we call justice give, and to whom or what does it give it? Ooh. Polemarchus. If we were to follow the previous answers, Socrates, yeah, he's leading you into... If Socrates is asking you like a series of questions, he's probably leading you into a trap. It gives benefit to friends and harm to enemies. Okay. Because that's what he means by equating owed and appropriate. Does Simonides mean then that treating friends well and enemies badly is justice? Polemarchus. I believe so. Socrates. And who is most capable of treating sick friends well and enemies badly in matters of disease and health? Okay, sick friends well, enemies badly. Polemarchus, a doctor. Oh no. An evil doctor is like, oh yeah, I'll look over him. Don't you worry. And who can do so best in a storm at sea? Polemarchus. A ship's captain. What about the just person? In what actions and what work is he most capable of benefiting friends and harming enemies? Polemarchus. In wars and alliances, I imagine. Yeah. Makes sense to me. Alright, now, when people are not sick, Polemarchus, a doctor is useless to them. True, says Polemarchus. And so is a ship's captain to those who are not sailing. Uh-oh, you're getting into a trap. Yes. So the people who are not at war, a just man is useless. No, I don't think so at all. He's still useful. He's not the most useful, but he's useful. So justice is also useful in peacetime. War and peace. Yes, it is useful. And so is farming, isn't it? Ooh, maybe this is a more complex trap. Yes. From providing produce? Yes. And shoemaking as well? Yeah, you need shoes in both war and peace. Yes. For the acquisition of shoes, I suppose you would say. Acquisition of shoes. Yeah, you need to buy shoes all the time. Polemarchus, of course. Socrates, tell me then, what is justice useful for using or acquiring in peacetime? Contract, Socrates. Give me the contract. Yeah. By contracts, you mean partnerships, or what? Partnerships, of course. Yeah, business. So is it a just man who is a good and useful partner in a game of checkers, or an expert checkers player? Is it a just man who is a good and useful partner in a game of checkers, or an expert checkers player? Yeah, which one would you rather have as your partner? A just man or Garry Kasparov? An expert checkers player, says Polemarchus. Socrates. And in laying bricks and stones, is a just person a better and more useful partner than a builder? Polemarchus, not at all. Unless it's a just bricklayer. Think about that. And what is this just man? This is a just man has no skills at all. Well, in what kind of partnership, then, is a just person a better partner than a builder or a lyre player, in the way a lyre player is better than a just person at hitting the right notes? In money matters, I think. Money, money, money. I love how much money is in this. From the very beginning. Like, did you inherit your wealth, Cephalus? Yeah, but shh. Okay, I'm just thinking more about that Cephalus guy. It's like he'd bring his grandfather in. Like, what does a grandfather have to do with anything? Because it's like, yeah, I inherited my money, and I made more of it. I'm going to leave even more to my kids. But Boy, my grandfather made so much, like, I didn't inherit all that much. That's what people are always saying. Like a small loan of $1 million. Like, nah, it's not. Boy, my grandfather, he was the rich one. Me, I just a little, nothing. Okay, when yours must be deposited for safekeeping, Socrates. Is that right? Oh no, I skipped a page. Okay, except I presume, Polemarchus, in using money. You see, whenever one needs to buy or sell a horse jointly, I think a horse breeder is a more useful partner, isn't he? Yeah, I guess so. And when it is a boat builder, or a ship's captain, it would seem so. Yeah, expertise goes a long way. And what joint use of silver or gold, then, is a just person a more useful partner than anyone else? Yeah, this just person's kind of useless. When yours must be deposited for safekeeping, Socrates. You mean whenever there's no need to use it, but only keep it? Of course. So when money is not being used, that is when justice is useful for it. Oh, look at that trap. He's like, well, why do you need justice? The only time you can think you need justice, you need a just person more than anyone else, is when you're not using money. You just want to put it in the bank and leave it there. Boy, we need justice. We need someone who helps their friends and harms their enemies. At least in peacetime. It looks that way, says Polemarchus. When one needs to keep a pruning knife safe, justice is useful both in partnerships and for the individual. When you need to use it, however, it is the craft of vine pruning that is useful. Polemarchus, apparently. Okay, and would you also say that when one needs to keep a shield and a lyre safe and not use them, justice is a useful thing? But when you need to use them, it's the soldier's craft or the musician's that is useful. I would have to. And so in all other cases, too, justice is useless when they are in use, but useful when they are not. Yeah, all this stuff. We don't need justice. We just need domain experts. Polemarchus, it looks that way. Then, justice cannot be something excellent, can it, my friend, if it is only useful for useless things? Justice cannot be excellent. Yeah, do you want a friend who's really good at something, or somebody who's a good person? At least in money matters, he's saying, yeah, I'd get the good person. The person who's good at things. But let's consider the following point. Isn't the person who is cleverest at landing a blow, whether in boxing or any other kind of fight, also cleverest at guarding against it? Is that true? Any boxers out there know that it's like, are the best punchers also the best defenders? The best offense is a good defense? Polemarchus, of course. And this is also interesting. This is all tied up in personalities, this whole discussion. It's like hypothetical shipbuilder, hypothetical boxer, hypothetical shoemaker. It's, I don't know. It's interesting to me that, like, those are the relevant distinctions between people as their profession here. All right, Socrates. And the one who's clever at guarding against disease is also cleverest at producing it unnoticed. Ooh, that's my view at any rate. And the one who is a good guardian of an army is the very one who can steal the enemy's plans and dispositions. Yeah, you know what FDR said about appointing Joe Kennedy to the SEC? Because everybody's like, Joe Kennedy, he was like this Wall Street operator who's ripping people off. This is JFK's father. And FDR said, set a thief to catch a thief. Very little famous bit of Great Depression trivia. All right. Polemarchus, of course. So whenever someone is a clever guardian of something, he's also clever at stealing it. Yeah, or it's like the Frank Abnegali, the Catch Me If You Can guy. He's like, I don't know, he's like a airline security expert now, or forgery consultant. It seems so, says Polemarchus. So, if a just person is clever at guarding money, trapped, you're trapped. He must also be clever at stealing it. Ah, man, Socrates, you got me again. So the argument suggests, at least. It seems, then, that a just person has turned out to be a kind of thief. What? How'd you do that? How'd you do that? How'd you do that? Yeah, he's good at harming his enemy. Take a little something, a little tax. You probably got that idea from Homer, for he loves Autolycus, the maternal grandfather of Odysseus, whom he describes as better than everyone at stealing and swearing false oaths. According to you, Homer and Simonides, then, justice seems to be some sort of craft of stealing, one that benefits friends and harms enemies. Isn't that what you meant? Oh no, a thief. Justice is a thief. How'd we get here? That can't be right. Benefiting friends and harming enemies. Yeah, I mean, sort of like if you're doing like an RPG or one of those video games, like you always want a thief in your deck. Help you out. Justice. Polemarchus. No, by Zeus it is not. But I do not know any more what I meant. I still believe this, however, that benefiting one's friends and harming one's enemies is justice. So I really like this. Socrates has basically trapped Polemarchus with his argument and saying, like, okay, you basically just said justice is a thief. And Polemarchus is like, okay, I don't know where I went wrong with this argument, but I still believe what I believe. And to me, this is a very revealing moment. I mean, I don't know where this discussion's going to go, but people believe what they believe for essentially emotional reasons. And you can try to argue them out of something about some position or belief that they have. They're really not going to change, like, reason is not going to change their mind in most cases, because this is just, they just want to believe what they want to believe. There's probably some emotional basis to it. Maybe it's part of their identity somehow. It's not, you're not going to just trap them. You might win the debate, but you might lose them as a personal friend. Or you're definitely not going to change someone's mind about a lot of things just through reason and through like trapping them this way. Because it's just like embarrassing if you get trapped by Socrates. You're like, oh yeah, well now I believe Socrates because he got me. He's smarter than me. Nobody wants to admit that. Maybe that's why Cephalus was smart enough to leave earlier. He's just like, yeah, you're not going to change my mind. This doesn't have to do with reason. This is just looking after my own. Okay. Socrates, speaking of friends, do you mean those a person believes to be good and useful, or those who actually are good and useful, even if he does not believe they are, and similarly with enemies? Okay, yeah, what's a friend? You said benefiting friends and harming enemies. Who are friends and who are your enemies? Who's on your enemies list? Polemarchus. Probably one loves those one considers good and useful, and hates those one considers bad. Like, yeah, you're not good or useful. You're on my enemies list. Socrates. But don't people make mistakes about this, so that lots of those who seem to them to be good and useful aren't, and vice versa? Polemarchus, they do. And so now we're getting to the difference between perception and reality, which is very famously going to come up later here in the Republic. So, yeah, how do we know the true nature of someone when we're deciding that they're our friend or not? Deciding whether to unfriend them on Facebook. Polemarchus, they do. Socrates. So for them, good people are enemies, and bad ones, friends. Yeah, alright, so for people who are fooled, they got the wrong friends. Of course. All the same, is it then just for them to benefit bad people and harm good ones? Oh no. This ain't good. We're trying to benefit our friends and harm our enemies, but then we made the wrong friends and wrong enemies, so we're benefiting the wrong people. Dag nabbit. Apparently. Socrates, yet good people are just, and are not the sort to do injustice. Good people are just. Yeah, good people are just. I'd say that. True. According to your account, then, it is just to do bad things to those who do no injustice. It is just to do bad things. So we're doing bad things to our enemies, but we're mistaken about who our enemies should be, and they're the people doing no injustice. Oh, man. Socrates. Not at all, Socrates. It's my account that seems to be bad. It's just then, is it, to harm unjust people and benefit just ones? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Alright, forget the friends and enemies things. We're just going to help out just people and harm unjust people. That is justice. Kind of a circular definition there. So we're helping people who help just people, which means we help people who help us. Alright, that seems better in my view, says Polemarchus. Okay, that follows, Polemarchus, that it is just for many people, the ones who are mistaken in their judgment, to harm their friends, since they are bad for them, and benefit their enemies, since they are good. So we will find ourselves claiming the very opposite of what we said Simonides meant. Ah, Socrates! Yes, that certainly follows. Let's change our definition, for it looks as though we did not define friends and enemies correctly. That seems to be the case. How did we define them, Polemarchus? Well, we said that a friend is someone who is believed to be good. Socrates. And how are we to change that now? Someone who is both believed to be good, Polemarchus, and is good is a friend. Someone who is believed to be good but is not, and is believed to be a friend but is not. Same goes for enemies. Okay. You have to be believed to be good and be good. So it's sort of like Cephalus was saying, you got to be good and rich. And you got to be good and believed to be good. Alright. Yeah, that's better. According to that account, then, a good person will be a friend and a bad one an enemy. Polemarchus, yes. Socrates, so, you want us to add something to what we said before about the just man. Then we said that it is just to treat friends well and enemies badly. Now, you want us to add to this, to treat a friend well provided he is good, and harm an enemy provided he is bad. That seems reasonable to me. Little addendum we're adding. Yeah, Polemarchus, that seems well put to me. And what do we do about everybody else? How do we know? Socrates, should a just man really harm anyone whatsoever? Polemarchus, of course. He should harm those who are both bad and enemies. I can get on board with that. Socrates, when horses are harmed, do they become better or worse? Uh-oh. Here it comes. Socrates laying the trap. He's sure he's going to put out 2 or 3 things. Worse. With respect to the virtue that makes dogs good, or to the one that makes horses good. With respect to the one that makes horses good. Okay. This is probably arete. I'm guessing. Okay. So you're harming a horse, it makes the horse worse. Harming an enemy makes the enemy worse. How does that help anybody? When dogs are harmed, they become worse with respect to the virtue that makes dogs, not horses. Good? Necessarily. And what about human beings? So he's sort of talking about this virtue with respect to what one is. So whatever makes a horse good, you're making them worse. Whatever makes a dog good, you're making the dog worse when you hurt the dog. Alright, what about human beings, comrade? Shouldn't we say that when they are harmed to become worse with respect to human virtue? Of course. But isn't justice human virtue? That's necessarily so too. Now we have competing definitions of justice. Then, my dear Polemarchus, people who've been harmed are bound to become more unjust. Ah, no! Oh, Socrates, you got us again. So it seems. Now, can musicians use music to make people unmusical? No, they can't do that. Socrates. Or can horsemen use horsemanship to make people unhorsemanlike? Here again we have these, like, the professions coming in. Polemarchus. No. Well, and can just people use justice to make people unjust? In a word, can good people use their virtue or goodness to make people bad? Use your virtue to make someone bad. No, they can't. Uh-oh. Here it comes. The trap is set. For it isn't the function of heat to cool things down, I imagine, but that of its opposite. Yeah, you can't freeze water with fire. Polemarchus, yes. Socrates, nor the function of dryness to make things wet, but that of its opposite. Of course. So, the function of a good person is not to harm, but that of his opposite. Yeah, you can't be harming people if you're good, if you're just. Apparently, an unjust person is a good person. Of course. So, it isn't the function of a just person to harm a friend or anyone else, Polemarchus, but that of his opposite, an unjust person. Love your enemy. Maybe that's the lesson. I think you are absolutely right, Socrates. Socrates. So, if someone tells us it is just to give to each what he is owed, and understands by this that a just man should harm his enemies and benefit his friends, the one who says it is not wise. I mean, what he says is not true. Aha! Ha 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 ha. That's an interesting distinction. He says it is not wise. I mean, what he says is not true. So he corrects himself here. Because I'm seeing Socrates as a little bit of a trickster character. And it could be that a wise person says something that's not true. Okay, so he's kind of backtracking here. He's like, well, if this person's saying something that's clearly wrong, he's not wise. And he's like, well, I mean, what I meant to say was, he said something that's not true. He could still be wise. He could be leading you on here. So this is where I would go. If I actually knew Greek, I would go to the Greek and see how exactly this is spelt out. Because I think, for me, this is the core of the whole book. As far as, like, I haven't read this thing in ages, but the core controversy is, does Socrates mean what he says? And that distinction is laid out right here in this paragraph. One who says it is not wise, I mean what he says is not true. And saying that there's a difference between being wise and speaking truthfully. So this is really interesting to me. Okay, well, we'll keep going with it. For it has become clear to us that it is never just to harm anyone. Polemarchus, I agree. You and I will fight as partners, then, against anyone who tells us that Simonides, Bias, Pittacus, or any of our other wise and blessedly happy men said this. Yeah, come on. You gotta be my boy now. I, for my part, am willing to be your partner in the battle. So I really like how this has gone from sort of this abstract discussion about justice to, like, this, like, buddy cop movie. Where it's like, all right, you're on my team now. So it's interesting here. So this is finally... The other thing I just think is really interesting about this is that you saw before Polemarchus said, well, okay, you got me, Socrates, but I still believe what I believe, that justice is helping your friends and harming your enemies. And he wasn't really... It's like he wasn't really persuaded by the first argument, but he didn't see the flaw in his own thinking. And now, this is where Socrates has persuaded Polemarchus to actually change his mind. So it's like he's going to go to bat. Before Polemarchus was repeating Simonides, now Socrates is like, no, you're on my team now. So I find that shift to be very significant in terms of the relationship between reason, identity, alliance, emotion, psychology. So this is really fascinating. And so what was that appeal that he made? It wasn't that, like, Simonides, because before it was like, oh, well, you might not really know who your friends are, or your friends might actually be bad people. And Polemarchus didn't really want to think about that, because if your friends aren't really your friends, then, like, what else do you have? It's kind of a very personally threatening idea. But when he flips the argument around, it says, well, if you're harming your enemies, you're making them less virtuous. And so, in some sense, that appeals to Polemarchus's, like, desire to be a good person. It's like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I shouldn't make them worse people, should I? So, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be harming my enemies here. Instead of, like, thinking justice is a thief. Which he did not find persuasive. So ultimately, this is our little lesson in persuasion here, is that what actually finally... Polemarchus is caught in these logical traps, but this is the one that finally breaks through to him. Is that, a just person should not be harming people. Okay. Really, really interesting. So it's psychology as much as these abstract ideas of reason, and I think that kind of calls into the question, what is the relationship between reason and emotion in the first place? And this is something Nietzsche kind of talked about, much later. You had guys like Kant trying to provide like a logical basis as to what is essentially Christian ethics, with the categorical imperative and all this, kind of engaging in this sort of thought of like this implies this implies that, and then Nietzsche kind of came along and said, well, actually, the only reason you're doing this is you just want to justify Christianity by some other means, but it's essentially an emotional project that you're undertaking under the guise of reason, and so maybe these two things cannot be disentangled. I mean, we try so hard to disentangle reason and emotion, but maybe ultimately there's no way to do that. So I don't know. I think this is all really fascinating. Okay, so Socrates says, "Do you know whose saying I think it is, that it is just to benefit friends and harm enemies?" Yeah, where did that come from anyway? I thought it was Simonides. Whose? Says Polemarchus. I think it's a saying of Periander, or Perdiccas, or Xerxes, or Ismenias of Thebes, or some other wealthy man who thought he had great power. Is he doing an ad hominem attack now? He's like, well, I think it was one of those rich guys trying to rip you off. Polemarchus, that's absolutely true. All right. Since it has become apparent, then, that neither justice nor the just consists in benefiting friends and harming enemies, what else should one say it is? All right, we've kind of like, the first fighter has shown up, Socrates has thrown him to the ground, and then won him over to his side. And this is sort of this idea of persuasion links back to the opening scene, which sort of looked irrelevant. Like, oh, why are these guys coming back from the festival? And then, was it was it I forgot who was it? Was that Polemarchus at the beginning? Who was saying, "Well, we are numbered greater than you. You're gonna have to do what we say." And they're like, "Well, okay. What if we persuade you?" And they're like, "Nah, we can't be persuaded." Like, "No, we can't persuade you either." So this is the persuasion happening. Okay. As distinct from just winning the debate. Okay. Now, while we were speaking, so this is sort of the Socrates narrative frame, Thrasymachus had tried many times to take over the discussion, but was restrained by those sitting near him, who wanted to hear our argument to the end. When we paused after what I had just said, however, he could not keep quiet any longer. Crouched up, like a wild beast, about to spring, he hurled himself at us, as if to tear us to pieces. Polemarchus and I were frightened and flustered as he roared into our midst. Da-da-da! Okay, I am going to... Should I stop the video here? I think I'm going to stop the video here. Otherwise, it's going to be like 3 hours long. So this is a great stopping place. I didn't realize there'd be a good stopping point. But so that's the end of the first part of Book 1 of the Republic. I'm just going to go ahead and summarize everything that we know here. So it started out with this festival. Glaucon and Socrates are walking along, coming back from the festival. The Thracians are mentioned for some reason, and then I'm going to say they run into Paul. I'm going to go back. Let's see, table of contents, Book 1. I think they ran into Polemarchus. Yeah, Polemarchus said, hold up. And then again, as I mentioned, I thought maybe that physical situation would mirror the intellectual one. Sure enough, it did. Just later on in the book, when Polemarchus is struggling to keep up with the great Socrates. So they all meet up together, and then like, oh yeah, you can't. We're more than you. You have to do what we say. And Socrates is like, well, I guess so. Maybe we could persuade you, but maybe not. And ultimately they go over to Cephalus's house, who's making a sacrifice in the backyard. And Socrates just starts talking to Cephalus. So they talk a little bit about they start talking about old age. And Cephalus, because Cephalus is old, he is at death's door. And Cephalus starts talking about, he quotes Sophocles. He's like, yeah, well, I was hanging out with Sophocles and someone was asking him the same thing, like, can you make love to a woman anymore? And he said, well, it's actually kind of nice to be free from deranged and insane master. And so, I liked it because these are sort of some universal fears, maybe just universal male fears. And they're also just talking about kind of real things and real concerns that we're all gonna have to face death sometime. So then Cephalus, I like this idea of this sort of the other side of the fence there, with old people just saying like, yeah, actually, like, you can't make love to a woman anymore, but it's actually kind of nice, not just like being on Tinder all the time or whatever, and just having time to be more philosophical. This idea also comes up in Brave New World. I will link to it below or above or somewhere on here. And that one of the big ideas in Brave New World is that they wanted to eliminate old age essentially in order to eliminate philosophy. So they have these techniques for keeping people young forever, so they're just always engaging in the appetites of the flesh, and as a result, they don't really think about justice. They don't really question anything. They're just trying to go on dates constantly and have orgies. So it is an interesting idea, just the sort of the relationship between like sex drive and philosophy and old age. And yeah, sometimes like I met an old man just a few days ago who's just spent his life as a dermatologist and said he's suddenly gotten really interested. Like he's like in his 70s now and has suddenly gotten very interested in philosophy and is just reading constantly and thinking about the big questions, which he was kind of too busy for as a younger man. So the idea of philosophy as an old man's game is interesting to me. So anyhow, they talk about that for a little bit, and then Socrates kind of out of nowhere just says like, "Well, where'd you get your money, buddy? Did you inherit it?" Cephalus kind of downplays his inheritance. He's like, "Yeah, I inherited money, but my grandfather had a lot more." And then Socrates says, "Well, what's wealth useful for?" Cephalus says, "Well, it's the most useful thing I'll tell you is I think about death a lot, and since I have money, then I don't have to worry about. Basically, I don't have to worry about going to hell because like I might have some unpaid debts because I got enough money to pay off all my debts. I sleep good at night." That's pretty much at my age. That's what money is most useful for. Like I'm not. Other people miss all these feasts and drinking parties, but I don't really. He says. So yeah, and then Cephalus. They start talking about. Socrates starts asking Cephalus about justice, and Cephalus is just got to go back to his courtyard to continue the sacrifices. Again, I see that as potentially very significant, and I'm kind of curious to read more about interpretations of Cephalus and whether the philosophical project is ultimately doomed. If Cephalus is the smartest person in the book, so Cephalus leaves, and then there's Polemarchus, the heir to the discussion. Ha ha ha! And they start talking about definitions of justice. Polemarchus puts forth this idea that justice is helping your friends and harming your enemies, and Socrates kind of pokes a number of holes in it. He says, well, sometimes you don't actually know who your friends are, or first he says, like, well, when's that actually useful? Is it only useful in wartime? What about peacetime? Was it only for holding your money? But if the person's really good at holding your money, he must be good at stealing it. So does that mean that the just person is a really good thief? Polemarchus doesn't really like that. Socrates also goes through this idea of not really knowing who's good and who's bad, which I think is extremely important, just philosophically, for anything. It's like, okay, you come up with some abstract principle. How do you actually know the thing is what you think it is? And usually we really just don't. We gotta rely on our perceptions. We rely on the media. We rely on various mediations of that knowledge, of that experience. And so finally he breaks through to Polemarchus by appealing to this idea of virtue and that a just person should not cause someone else to be less just through this definition. And I think they had some other little mini arguments in there. And that's what ultimately persuades Polemarchus to join Socrates in denouncing that idea of justice, which, I don't know, most people don't really do anymore. People don't really spend their time that way. And then, yeah, so he starts to make these like sort of ad hominem attacks. He's like, well, yeah, I think that's a saying of one of those famous wealthy guys who's just trying to use you. And then finally they say, okay, we've completely disposed of that idea of justice. What else you got? And that's when Thrasymachus pipes up. And so tomorrow we will continue with Thrasymachus and see what his idea of justice may be now that we've gotten through Cephalus and Polemarchus. So I hope you're enjoying this. I'm enjoying a lot more than I thought I would, and a lot more than I did when I was reading this in high school, partly because I think I've got I'm more interested in almost these kind of meta ideas of who's telling the truth. So we had this idea of how do you really know that a good person is a good person or a friend is a good person? how do we know what these characters' true beliefs are, even like as they're talking? And Socrates has been fairly cagey. I personally saw the most significant part of this as being that correction where he said, someone who says this is not wise. I mean, if he says that, he's not telling the truth. So I'm really fascinated by this interplay between wisdom and truth. And I think just reading this now, being a bit older than I was then, I'm more able to, or I'm at least more interested in seeing what is really on these characters' minds, rather than just kind of taking it at face value. Like, Socrates believed this. Does Socrates believe anything here? I don't know, but I'm curious to keep reading and see where this goes. So, hope you're enjoying this. If you are, hit the thumbs up button down below. If you noticed anything that I didn't, leave a comment. If you disagree with something I said, also leave a comment. I'll probably be posting this to Reddit. Check out the Book Clap Review Clap subreddit, where discussions of Plato's Republic are going to happen. That's the PewDiePie book subreddit. Try to continue maybe some discussion over there. And look forward to the next one. Hit subscribe. See you tomorrow.